nicest invite I have ever gotten. My heart absolutely melted last night.
Wow. What was the invite?
So my daughter, we're here in Michigan, and my daughter Eliana was the flower girl for my niece's wedding.
Yeah.
And she was all dolled up in her dress, and her hair was all pretty, and she walked up to me and said, "Daddy, would you go and dance with me? Would you like to dance with me?" And it was probably one of the most wonderful dance invitations I have ever received. My heart was definitely on the floor.
Better than stuff with Jess?
Oh, my wife is wonderful to dance with. I love dancing with her, but it definitely caught me off guard to have my dolled up, beautiful daughter walk up to me and ask me if Daddy would want to dance with her.
I bet that's awful sweet. And she, obviously all this catwalking practice she's had's come in handy then.
It is working out well for her.
You told us she was developing her promenade walk or her runway walk, I guess it was.
Oh gosh. She has a couple walks, a couple of struts that are very L and very well defined. Thankfully, she did not use those when walking down the aisle throwing flowers. That would have been a whole nother level of interesting.
Yeah, that's why they slowed those walks down, I think, for the weddings. Party slowly, one step at a time, and all that. Yeah, we're in the same time zone. Look at that.
We are in the same time zone for the first time in a while since we were out in Wyoming and we got to record live. Yeah.
And then lost it.
Yes. Well, we got one and then lost the other one.
We did.
So how has the feedback been from the podcast of the best day you've ever had? I have a text message that I got from somebody that was loving it. But I want to hear first what the feedback has been for you.
Oh, I've got a lot of feedback from people. Unfortunately, none very critical yet. I picked a few going, "You out of your mind? What are you thinking? God doesn't talk that way to people," or whatever. But this one from Jason: "Today's podcast was probably the best I've ever heard. Truly unbelievable. Your vulnerability was inspiring. Your I was made to love and care for the 7-year-old girl. Absolutely beautiful. I would say it was totally the Lord sharing His heart with yours. So powerful." So yeah, a lot of text like that, a lot of email like that. Some of the blog comments are people who have really been touched by it. So I'm still processing it myself. It was kind of fun to ponder it with you and then ponder it again when I edited it all and then pondered it again when Sarah and I listened to it yesterday, and I'm still pondering.
Well, I know the individual that reached out to me said, "Dude, best podcast I've ever heard. I've listened to it a lot. I mean a lot. I've listened to a lot, and I mean a lot of podcasts. So glad you were a part. Your questions were spot on and perfect. Truly inspiring story. Life-changing for me." So just as an encouragement to you guys.
That's cool. I noticed that there's a lot. That's been, almost 2 weeks ago now for me.
Yeah. That
moment. I notice how much of that is filtering in my life, even though I haven't chosen to believe it yet. You know, the productivity passion for me is definitely shifted. I don't even think about it. Each day is now filled with Sarah and what we need to do with the RV and what plans we're making. And it's just, if I write, if I blog, if I do something else, then fabulous. And if I don't, I don't have that obligation, responsibility thing, which I didn't think I had before, but now I kind of see, there was still a lot of that still hanging on. So we're going to see where that part of it goes.
So, I mean, as you guys have been processing it and as you've been holding it, has there been new things that you've really seen? Because you talked about seeing it filtered in even before you have agreed upon it, that God's already integrating it into your life. What is that looking like?
Yeah, it's looking a lot like joy and freedom and just, there's a different stage of the journey that's kind of unfolded through it. One of the things that's caused me to really refocus on again is, what does salvation mean? You know, religion has got us all focused on salvation as the heaven or hell question, and basking in what God has been doing over the last 6 months in our life. Salvation is rescuing us from the most broken places where life has driven us to. And to really see salvation not as the heaven and hell question at all, but Jesus coming. I was reading again this morning the the words from Jesus. And when he gets to Matthew or Luke, and he's talking about the Spirit, he's quoting from Isaiah, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. And I think in the face of that, trying to see salvation as I've got to figure out heaven and hell, and if I qualify, and if I've gone too far, it's just crazy. There's so many dark places. Walking with someone this morning that was lost for a significant period of time is some really dark pornography because of his abuse he suffered as a young man, and just going and God liberating him from that, just in the honesty of opening his life to know this is what salvation is. It's not God saying, "Oh, you get your get out of hell free card." It's, where did you get lost and where do you get stuck? And I want to rescue you. I want to save you out of the darkness into the light. And there's so much of that, even that quote from Luke or Isaiah that goes to, Sarah, to make the blind see, to set the oppressed free, to take a heart that's been broken and mend it again. I mean, that's what Jesus is passionate about. He's not just, do we qualify? Are we righteous enough? Do we read our Bible enough to get into heaven? And all the things that we've gotten lost in. And my early years were filled with. And now to see, no, salvation is God setting the oppressed free, binding up the brokenhearted. And I've seen that just in a lot of conversations and thoughts this week of, man, salvation is really about here and now. It's really about encouraging people onto the fullness of what God has for them. And it's not a matter of just surviving till the end of the age.
What are the implications of that? Because that was the initial perspective that I was given of salvation as well. And I've since come to adhere to more of a perspective of salvation like you're describing, of it's in the here and now that God is moving right now, rescuing and restoring his beloved. Literally, that was the verse that Jesus chose to represent. That was the passage Jesus chose to represent what he was doing on earth.
That's my theme verse. Yeah, that's the mission.
Yeah, exactly. This is my life verse. If you want to go like early 2000s, this is my life verse, and it has nothing to do with heaven and hell. It had nothing to do with eternal damnation, and everything to do with, I'm going to rescue my beloved, and I'm here to pursue and rescue and set my beloved free from the incredible brokenness and pain and distance that they currently have from me.
How much would that change our conversations with unbelievers?
Oh my gosh.
Who, the thing is, I've got to get them on the Roman road, and I've got to get them to see things and repent and get saved and get baptized and whatever, instead of, how do I help you see the light? How do I help comfort you in the darkness? How am I helping being alongside Jesus as Jesus is rescuing you? Now that would put every conversation we have with people of faith and people who aren't of faith yet in a very different context. It's not to get the get out of hell free card. It's to really rescue them wherever they're broken or hurt. It's Jesus talking about the 99 and the one, and I'll leave the 99 to go find the one that knows it's lost and knows it's broken and wants to be redeemed. And it's just, that's what's growing in my heart, man. This is really about rescuing the lost in a very different way than I was schooled in it growing up.
For me, that's actually good news versus some ethereal statement of, okay, well, at least you're going to get your eternity, get out of hell free card. You're not going to burn in the pit of hell for eternity once you die. Like, okay, yeah, there's a bit of a fear factor. I would like to avoid that. That would be great. But when the conversation shifts to, I want to set you free from major depressive disorder in an instant. I want to restore a heart that was broken from trauma. I want to come in and introduce you to life and life in the full. And now, are we going to experience that in its totality in this age? No. But man, to be able to encounter the kingdom now versus saying, well, just endure, do some sin management, get your behavior modification in, check your checklist of being a good Christian, and then once you die, then you're good. Then you can actually experience life and joy and freedom and happiness and restoration.
Yeah, even the prayer, the question becomes, how are you saving me today, God? What are you rescuing me from today? So,
Yes.
and even if it's not in an instant, like it may be a 64-year arc to
Totally.
bring out of the darkness and into the light, and for your eyes to see what they haven't been able to see, and that restored innocence. And I see now that what Jesus was really about was not destiny at all. It was about living here and now, free from what sin has done to twist us, what the enemy has done to lie to us, what friends and family have done to mar our journeys, and find our way into the light, into a better journey. And so then it's God saving me every day. And now we're about, once saved, always saved. All those questions go away when salvation is really about knowing Him and learning to live in the light, and learning to let go of the things that twisted us, as Jesus, going back to our transformational chart, as Jesus untwists the stuff. And and that comes back to me over and over again. It's not us untwisting. We have no hope of fixing ourselves. And if you're hearing us go, oh, that's great, I need to fix this. No, you have no hope of fixing yourself. But Jesus is the rescuer. He's the one that redeems. And so I just learned to lean into that space of reality. Let Him poke holes in my illusions, painful though it be, so that because He's coming not to do something to make me do His stuff. He's coming to rescue me, to let me live in the light and freedom that He created me to be a part of. And so I get real excited about that.
I do too. I mean, that comes back to, for me anyway, that's a conversation that anyone wants to hear. Like, those are the conversations that I'm daily in with people, whether they be life coaching clients or therapy clients. That's the question of, how do I get this part of my heart healed? How do I move through this traumatic space? How do I heal this challenging relationship with a family member, or, whatever that looks like? Those are the questions they're asking. And that's what it means to live in the salvation of today. Like, oh my gosh, like, that's so different than, well, we just got to kind of sort it out until I die, and then I'll actually get to experience what salvation is.
Hey, then the question isn't, do you know Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior? But the question is there anything I can do to help you today? How can I help you?
Yeah.
And that would change the way Jesus makes entrance into the world, even with our unbelieving friends. It's not the gospel first. It's salvation first, and then come understand the gospel. So
then it's not, like, honestly, like, there's not even that question of, because as you're living in that relational experience of the salvation, the manifestation of the salvation of Christ in your life in every single day, then the question of, well, am I saved? Isn't even that's not even a question anymore, right? Because you know Him. You're in relationship with Him. You're watching Him move out and live out salvation every single day. Versus, oh, well, I don't know, I'm going to have to take care of my behavior to make sure that my get out of hell free card is still valid when I go to punch that ticket at the pearly gates. It's like, whoa. No, I actually know Him. I actually have walked with Him and seen His salvation already beginning to be lived out in my life.
Yeah, when you get real excited, Kyle, your mic really distorts. So you're going to have to hold your passion down just a little bit. I know you even got your normal headset there, so things are a little bit flaky on your end. But
I have along these lines, and I got thrown by a client this week. And it's not necessarily like the most uplifting best thing I heard this week, but it was very disruptive. So I was working with a client this week.
And disruption is good.
Disruption is very good.
Yes.
And we were talking about this incredibly painful trauma situation that this client had gone through, and specifically had gone through because of the actions of another person. This other person had decided to end their own life, and this person was closely tied to the individual that ended their own life. And the person that I was working with, they had a very close tie. Like, their faith was very important to them. And I said, okay, if you believe that God is always there, like always present, what do you think God was thinking if He was standing in the room with this individual as they were about to pull the trigger? What do you think God was thinking? And the response was, I think that God would be sobbing and in some way wrestling as to, I failed him. I failed this person. I wasn't able to do enough. I failed this person. And so that's the context of this question. And then what came up was, okay, Jesus, if you came and experienced the totality of human experience, if there's nothing that in my walk through this life that you haven't experienced or worked through or had to navigate, when did you either feel failure or when did you fail?
And your answer was?
I don't know. I have no idea. As I have processed this with a couple of close friends, and I want to get your feedback on this, especially after the last several months and just what you guys have navigated and even some of the conversations that you and I had that we shared on the podcast about feeling like a failure. Like if I failed at loving my wife well, right? Like that was one of the thoughts that you had as you were going through the initial pain of this. And my thought was, okay, Lord, first of all, if that's the case, when did you feel that? When did you experience that? And second, the second thought that came to my mind is, do you have a very different perspective on what failure and what it means to fail actually is? Like, is your perspective, is your heart behind that, is your vision of that very different than what I have? Because honestly, my knee-jerk reaction was failure equates sin. That was the first place my mind went, is that there's no way that God could fail because then God would be sinning. But that's not the case, I don't think. And so it was just this really interesting, like, ooh, okay, Lord. And I don't know. I'm going to pause there because I want your feedback on this. There's a couple of people that I process with this that listen to the podcast that are waiting to hear your response. So I'm going to drop that bomb in your lap and see where you go with it.
I don't know. It's a different thought for me to think that Jesus would have been tempted with failure, or that Jesus would have failed, or even that Jesus would feel that if someone's committing suicide, that Jesus would say, I have failed. Because the view I have of Jesus is he's always done everything he can do to open the doors to healing, forgiveness, freedom, and do people fail to respond to that? I mean, that's true even in his own journey. I mean, he could look at failure as these guys are trying to kill me when I've only come to love them, and which is, it could feel like failure. You could have the feelings of it, but if you're only doing the things you see the Father doing and only saying the things you hear the Father saying, which is how he lived his life, I'm not sure he would have that same sense of failure that we have. But from a human standpoint, I think failure is just sewn into our stories and our DNA. If we're trying to be failure-free in life, we've already lost that fight, all of us. And if we're going to have a failure-free future, we're going to be focused on the wrong thing. And we probably will fail a lot more trying not to fail, right? Like, how many people go on a diet saying, I'm really going to watch my eating habits, and then you fail miserably because watching your eating habits makes you want to eat more. It just does.
Yeah.
The focus on the flesh, as Paul says, is death. So I think from a human standpoint, man, I've learned some really, really good stuff in failures. Business leaders will tell you that. You can fail at a million ideas to hit one golden one that works well. You don't have to hit on everything. And failure is a great way to learn that doesn't work. Thomas Edison allegedly said, when he did 189 versions of the light bulb and saying, well, now I know 188 ways that don't work. And so even failure is a great way to learn and let God deal with our hearts. But I don't know, because I guess what I'm thinking about in the question is it one thing to say Jesus failed, which is, I can't imagine that that's in his repertoire. It's another thing to say people failed to respond to him. People failed to respond to the opportunities that were theirs, I guess. Okay. Does that make sense?
It does. And for me, the first thought that I went to when I was really processing the question on my drive back was, okay, if I was standing in the room and one of my daughters was in a place of so much pain and hopelessness that they decided to end their life, and I was standing in the room, what would I feel as a loving dad? where would my mind go? And I know for me in my humanity, part of me would say, God, how did I fail my daughter to where she reached this point where she felt so hopeless that this was her only way out? So that for me, that was one of the things that I really wrestled with. And yet my way and the way that I even just view things versus the way that God views things is so different. So I don't even know, like, I don't know how to even answer that for God because, or like, I don't even know how to speculate in that regard of what he would be feeling in that moment. I don't know because the way that he sees things, and this is what I'm discovering, is the way that he sees things and the way that he even addresses our trauma, addresses the areas of our brokenness in our life, the way that he works out our salvation in our life in the day to day, where he continues to finish the good work in our lives that he began, right? Like, It's so different than the way that I perceive it. I'm starting to learn, and yet the way that he views it is so different. And so I don't know. I honestly don't know, Wayne. Because I agree with you, like, as far as like Jesus failed versus like people failing to respond to him. And yet, if that's the case, then how can Jesus, if that's the case, that he never experienced failure, then how can he connect and lament if I'm feeling like a failure? How can he soothe me? How can he care for me? How can he speak into my heart in that moment if that's never an experience that he's ever had?
Does he have to have failed someone to have empathy for that, I guess? I mean, I think he can watch all the things his love failed to do while he was on the planet. And that would give him enough to feel what I feel, I guess. I mean, I almost faced what you're saying. If Sarah had committed suicide, and she said she wouldn't have left the letter for me, I can't imagine without some major revelation from God that I would not have lived out the rest of my days saying I failed to love her.
Yeah.
I felt that just in the leaving. Somehow 46 years, she doesn't know that I love her and care about her. And, you know, I didn't know about trauma then. I didn't have that to backstop me and go, I mean, I had God saying it's not what it appears to be, but I didn't know what it was. And I didn't know that was God. I was pondering that still, you know, could that just be Wayne's way of slapping a good face on something pretty dark? But if Sarah was gone now, at her own hand, then I don't know how God would have drugged me out of that pit, because I would have definitely felt like I failed her. Yeah. Would God feel the same way? That's where I have a hard time putting that on God. And would I have a hard time saying that God couldn't, or Jesus couldn't be in my pain of that feeling of failure? I wouldn't have any problem with him having all the empathy and whatever he said. I would know he knows what I'm feeling, even if he never did it. Because tempted in all ways like we are, yet without sin. I think that can be put to extreme cases, you know, and like God knows failure. I don't think God knows failure in that sense.
And for me, I think that's where I was kind of landing is, I don't even know if, like, I know that God, like, and it has in the past where I've felt like a failure or I've experienced failure. There's been incredible amounts of empathy and grace and rest that has come in the midst of that. And there's been a lot of learning and growth and healing that's come in the midst of that. I agree that if you live your life in avoidance of failure, then already, like, you basically are cemented yourself into a concrete bunker that's lined with a bubble, you know? Like,
and you're still a prisoner to fear. Yeah.
Exactly. I have no idea where I land with this. It still has me. I'm just holding it. I'm just pondering it because it's like, Lord, I have no idea. I don't know how to respond to that person. But their response, like that put a very human perspective on how God would respond, right? Like, because I would probably go to the same, like, as you said, I would go to probably a very similar place if I was in that situation. Like, if I was standing in the room and somebody that I loved was about to end their life and I couldn't stop them, there would be that. I don't know how I wouldn't feel that. in some form or fashion. And yet, what would Jesus' lens be in that moment? Other than deep, deep sorrow for his beloved child feeling this much pain, what else would be on his mind? I have no idea, and I don't know how to answer that.
Well, the other advantage, I think, for God is death is not final for him.
Yes.
Right? So
yeah.
if Sarah does that, commits suicide, Jesus is on the other side of that. I'm convinced of that. The whole lie that suicide is your last act is murder and you go to hell
oh my gosh.
and separate from God, it's just crazy talk. It was meant to restrain people from doing it. It wasn't meant to be healing to people who've had friends, family experience it. Jesus has the advantage of, okay, I didn't get you there. I'm going to get you here. I'll still have you. You're still mine. It's not lost. In the same way, you might fail your daughter to stop her getting burned on the stove or something, but you're still on the other side of the burn to love and to hold and to get help and to do whatever. So
that's good.
That's a real advantage to God, because death is not final for him. It's only final on this side. So I think that. The other thing I think of is he watched Peter go through it, right? He watched John go through it. He watched where he was even saying, you're going to fail me, that you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter's, no, I'm not, man. I love you. I'd die for you. And Jesus knows better. And he already says to him, I've already prayed for that your faith fail not, and that when you return, you can strengthen your brothers. So Jesus already factored in his failure before he made it, which I didn't grow up with that Jesus in Sunday school. I did not. You do everything you can to keep from failing. And then when you fail, and this is, Peter's is one of those biggies, you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my Father in heaven. So, you could go really into a dark place with Jesus' own words about that. Instead of realize Jesus had Peter in his heart. Jesus knew where the weakness of his flesh was, knew that he would fail, knew that he would be on the other side of it with Peter, and that he could restore him in the joy of realizing, hey, your flesh got too big that night, and your flesh was bigger than your heart. And boy, I've had moments like that in my 69-year journey. Yes. So I love that he's the restorer in those kinds of things. And, we put it in the shack with Missy, being up there. Where's Jesus at that point? Well, he's with her. What's going on in there? We don't know. Jesus is big enough to hold. That's what I trust. I know a Jesus big enough to hold us in the pain of our brokenness, in our failures, in our hurts, in Sarah's trauma. We've been through it on this trip a couple of times very deeply, into knowing that God's big enough to hold the darkest of pains and reroute that. They don't own you for life. When you let Jesus' light shine into the dark place, he rescues. We're back to salvation again. He saves us. And for watching Sarah go through these memory things of these moments when they're dark and they're hurtful and they don't seem to make any sense, and it's just raw pain, to where when it finally gets processed out on the other side, and then there's not joy that it happened, but there's joy in spite of the fact that it happened. There's joy that takes hold, that where the healing is greater than the damage done. And if that isn't a great understanding of salvation, I don't know what is. It's greater than the damage that was done to you. It's greater than the damage you've done to yourself. If you've been captivated by sin and lost in some addiction or whatever, his love is greater than that. And I had a guy who's written me a number of times over the last few months. He wrote me, and I thought he's had some neat insights. We've had a little online correspondence, so I've never met him. And he wrote me a thing, said, I'm sure this is going to ruin our relationship, because I knew he had an addictive personality, and I knew he was in some kind of 12-step program to help with that. And he admitted to me in this email, he said, I know this will probably end our friendship, but my addiction was not to drugs or alcohol, it was pornography. And my first thought was, why would that change anything for me? Why? And I wrote him back and said, why would that impact our friendship? And I know the shame of it all, that sexual things are the worst things and, all that. I get that. But man, it's not the be end all, do all horrible thing that Jesus can't rescue you from. And Jesus has rescued this brother from it in an amazing way. And yet, for him, it was a big deal to admit that to me, thinking this might end our online friendship. Right, not even a thought. Well, I know lots of people who struggled with that addiction. I just, it's 80% of pastors admit in private confidential studies to be addicted to pornography. So this is not news. I think what gives it power over people's lives is I'm the only one doing this. Instead of, no, you're not. Come on. There's nothing that we do that other people haven't been through, haven't faced the damage of it and the temptation of it, and there aren't great stories to talk about God's redemption. One of the emails I got this week, and I hope it's okay that I share it. I've asked her, and I haven't heard back from her yet, so I'm going to kind of be oblique about this. Someone from a foreign country in Africa, just saying as they were listening to the last podcast, crying and laughing at the same time. So incredibly happy for you and Sarah. I'm on cloud nine. Your story demonstrates God's love in abundance and his perfect timing to reveal this to you whilst alone with your beloved, beautiful Sarah and driving through the glorious fall colors. There's no doubt in my mind that God gave you to Sarah because he could trust you to love her in the way she needed, because that is what God did for me. He gave me my beautiful husband for the same reason. Her trauma was different. She watched her eight-year-old sister killed in a roadside car accident outside their home. And that just sent her into a very, very dark life. At 29, acting out in very dark ways, trying to medicate her trauma, doing horrible things, being used by any man that would extend her any amount of quote unquote love. We know people like that, right? That just do anything for what they think is the attention of a man, even if it's horrible and exploitive and all that. And she said, even at 28, met this guy, and why he would even take an interest in me. And I love that her story, I hope that what she said out of hearing my story was, God did that for me too. I had a man in my life who's walked and she says that, in the darkest places of my brokenness with me, forgiven my sins, been with me in the darkness, held her. In fact, he had said a week before the podcast aired that you and I had recorded, that he felt like God had given him to her for her freedom and liberty. And so she said they just were incredibly touched by the podcast. But one of the best things I hope that last podcast is, and what we're talking about right now, is for men or women who have traumatized spouses. If you could at all begin to wrap your heart around, maybe it's not I got in a bad marriage. Maybe God gave me to this marriage to be the gift my partner needs, so they can experience the salvation of the Lord in the darkest place of their heart. And that would change so much, right? Particularly for spouses in trauma that are more fighting, freezing than maybe Sarah was. But to realize the person closest to me, that maybe getting married wasn't an accident. And maybe we were given to each other because we could be, and not just me to Sarah. We had this talk on our walk the other day. Sarah's love has healed my life in so many ways over the 46 years of our marriage. So whether it was part of her fawning or beyond her fawning or whatever, I know I've been deeply loved by this woman, and being loved by her has changed my life. And one of the things I wrote to her when she was gone was, I don't care what I've done wrong that's hurt you in this way, whatever it is, I want to fix it. I've always become a better person learning to love you the way Sarah needs to be loved. That's always been to my benefit. It's never been like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice now because I married someone that's got this problem or that problem. If spouses could wrap their hearts around the fact that we're given to each other, because in that intimate proximity to each other, if we give way to God's working in that and not just make it about ourselves and what I get from this marriage and what I want and all, the whole Jonah commentary, he made it about himself. If we can not make it about ourselves and genuinely learn from Jesus how to love people in their most broken places, believe me, there is nothing better you can do with your life. There's no achievement. There's no success in business. There's no anything that makes up for being part of someone else's healing. And in a marriage, if both of you are a part of the other's healing, the mutuality, salvation and rescue, to me, that's the best of what marriage was made to be. But so often when the darkness sets in, people cut and run. People just, it can be from both sides. I'm running because I'm in pain and I just can't face having another person in my life. Or I'm running because I'm not ready to deal with pain in my life. And man, this is, I come back to, this is the work of salvation. This is the work of it. It's to be involved in people's lives. in some amazing ways of watching God rescue, heal, comfort, when all you can do is just be there. Love's 99% being there, not fixing. You're not the what you said the other podcast or two ago about, we're not the Savior, we're the doorway. We open a door so that people can see Jesus in us or through us. And that's Jesus is the rescuer, but we can be a part of that process with people. There's no greater honor. There's no greater privilege. I will die knowing that's the most significant thing I was ever part of. Or maybe I get raptured. Who knows? We'll see what he has in mind.
Either one would be fine.
Whatever.
Yeah, I love especially, and I want to just reiterate this, that it's not a pressure thing. It's not an anxiety thing. It's not a obligation of, okay, now that I got married, I have to be the one. No, it's an invitation. And a lot of the time I miss the invitation. I miss seeing how God is working out his salvation in my wife's life and vice versa. But knowing that I get the opportunity and the privilege to have a front row seat and watching my wife's heart be restored and drawn into a deeper space. And honestly, like the incredible honor of knowing that I might be a part of some of that. That's incredible to me.
Oh, it is incredibly good. And this from frequent correspondent Mike, I've read some of his stuff before. He says this: trauma dumps a person in the middle of dense fog and mist and into a deep valley by default. He says, I love the scripture. We don't yet see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist, but it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then, see it as all clearly as God sees us, knowing him directly just as he knows us. That's 1 Corinthians 13:12. He said, I hear the front end of this verse for others to explain the present confusion, that it will all make sense in the next life. It rubs me the wrong way, and it makes me feel stuck, waiting. And that's the thing about salvation. Putting it in the future, let's just be stuck. We're just waiting. Nothing I can do. Hopefully it comes someday and I'll get it. He said, it makes a great rationale for suicide. I find the back end of this scripture the big deal.
Yeah.
I know love because I learned to know I am loved. I know forgiveness because I am forgiven. You can place any fruit of the Spirit there, and it works. It's a relationship, and the kingdom begins in this life. Why would I selfishly withhold it from anyone when love and forgiveness penetrate the dense fog? I profoundly know internal rage. And looking back, I can see how God stepped in and addressed it with me decades ago. I was not going to make it if he did not step in. He just asked me to go after him with my rage and not to take it out on others. It took years, and it was deeply personal between him and me. But the results were stunning. I still rage at times, but it does not threaten my existence nearly as much as before. I'll take it. The fog is still dense, but every once in a while it clears enough to realize I am known. I am still alive. I'll take it, squinting and all.
I love that.
I think that's a great picture for what we did. The reason that came to mind is what we're talking about salvation. I think we get too impatient with salvation and praying for miracles and want God to fix things right away and miss the 64-year arc of God freeing someone from trauma and miss what our love does to create the seed bed where God's fruit can grow in someone else's life. And I love this to say, if salvation is in eternity, then we might as well just end it all here and get on to it, or just sit around praying for the rapture. But if in fact God's rescuing us, and I love this dense fog squinting through it, is that not what your life is like, Kyle?
Oh my gosh, yes. So often.
Yeah, and if you just keep squinting into the fog with Jesus, then some of that fog lifts and you get every trauma memory Sari has is just like that. She sees a room, she sees shapes and forms undefined. It's like this fog mist, and then the fog begins to clarify a little bit. Oh, that's that person, and they said this, and oh, that's this. And over days, it opens up to be understood. Over a lifetime it's taken for this trauma to find a way into the light and help us understand the pain that Sarah's carried in her heart for so many years. It seemed not to make any sense. There was no understanding as to why it was there. I love this because I think because here's the point we have in the process, and we've tried to share this in the transformation thing. I think the part we have in Jesus rescuing us is being willing to look in the fog and see what truth God brings to us. And when he pokes holes in our illusions, to go with what he is revealing instead of what comforts me and retreating back into my coping mechanisms or whatever, which are the dark spaces of our heart.
Yeah.
It's to believe that even the things I think are true may not be. Even the things I think are maybe true about myself may not be. And that God has a better way. And I like what Mike said. It's love and forgiveness that penetrates the fog. And it's that clarifying reality that God wants to be for all of us in our journey. And when we get stuck, we got to remember, I did a thing on my videos, Instagram video about being behind a wall and thinking, I'm alone behind the wall. I've got to get through this wall to get to Jesus, instead of saying, no, Jesus is on this side of the wall. That's the incarnation. Jesus, if you're stuck, Jesus is stuck with you. If you're lost, Jesus is lost with you. He's with you in the moment. And I may not see him. I may not have the perspective to see him, but keep looking. Don't, maybe turn a little bit to the right or left to see that there's something more around you than you know. Don't stay focused on a wall you've got to conquer on your own to find the freedom and joy you want to find in him.
That brings me back to just the comment that I felt like he was giving me a while ago of, I'm big enough to rescue you and save you from the weeds. Like, if you're afraid of falling off the path and going into the weeds, it's kind of similar to the failure, right? Like, versus, no, I'm big enough that even if you do get into the weeds, I will be there and I will draw you back into where my kingdom is. I'll draw you back into my truth.
That's the confidence we need. He is in us. So if I'm in the weeds, he's in the weeds. If I'm behind the wall, he's behind the wall. And
if I'm in the bunker, he's in the bunker with me.
He's in the bunker, and anything can happen from there.